here in this room. My name is Alina Kutsko. I'm Vice President of GlobSec. And today at this session, we're going to be talking about the importance of the persecution of the criminal, crimes that are committed in Ukraine. We already started discussing over the past hour what it takes to end the war and what it takes to reconstruct Ukraine. But ending a major war is also about reconstructing our faith in justice and our conviction that international law can be upheld. For societies to move on, people need to feel that we do not simply take the atrocious crimes as a given and that the perpetrators are held accountable. If we achieve that, hopefully others in the future will be less convinced in their impunity and will be less likely to repeat these crimes. So, as everything else in this war, it is not only about Ukraine and Ukrainians. It is also about all of us. Bringing justice is important, but it's also not easy. To discuss what can be done right now with regards to the crimes committed in Ukraine, and not what consequences our efforts or lack of our effort brings to all of us, I'm honored to welcome Anton Korynevych, Ambassador at Large in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Welcome, Anton. We're going to have about 30 minutes for a conversation. I'm going to start with asking Mr. Ambassador questions, but we also want to hear from you. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. We'll make sure that you have a microphone and can jump in into conversation. But also for everybody who is joining us online, feel free to use Slido or the GlobSec app. The hashtag is GlobSecMT2022. But let's start with the conversation. Mr. Ambassador, if we follow the media, the coverage is rather gloomy about the prospects of our ability to mete out justice and to persecute the perpetrators. There are a million reasons that are mentioned why it cannot be done. But Ukraine already proved everybody wrong in our pessimistic assumptions about the war and about Ukrainian abilities to win. So we're all here to make sure that Ukraine proves the pessimist wrong again. Can you tell us what is your action plan? What are you working on to make sure that the crimes can be persecuted?
Well, first of all, thank you for today's conversation. And of course, I think that we should not concentrate on the reasons or issues why there may be some no's to this question, but we need to find the right answers, and we need to try to find the answer yes to all these questions. So I do believe that since we have now the biggest war in Europe since 1945, and since Europe has not ever seen in almost 80 years such atrocities, such mass atrocity crimes, we need to have legal responses for that. And I think that now we do have some architecture, infrastructure of international justice which can work and should work effectively. The International Court of Justice, when we talk about the responsibility of the Russian Federation as a state. The International Criminal Court, when we talk about the individual responsibility for the crime of genocide, for crimes against humanity, war crimes. We have national courts of Ukraine, which have already started to work in relation to the war crimes and the perpetrators of these crimes. We, as of now, do not have the court or tribunal which could bring perpetrators of the crime of aggression to justice. So by saying this, Ukraine effectively and actively uses all the available infrastructure and architecture of international justice, but Ukraine comes with the idea to our international partners and colleagues to establish a new international criminal tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, the one which now is lacking in the system of international criminal justice, and we do believe that its existence is a very important response to this aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine.
For those of us who are not lawyers, can you very briefly describe how this tribunal would look like, where is it going to be based, and what is it going to do?
Well, first of all, why this tribunal is needed, because, as I said right now, we do not have an international court or tribunal which can work with the crime of aggression. So that is why we need to establish it, and in such a way it will complement the International Criminal Court and it will complement the national courts of Ukraine. Because when we talk about the crime of aggression, this is a leadership crime, the crime which is perpetrated by the highest political officials or highest military officials of the state, of the Russian Federation. So we came with this idea together with prominent international lawyers in the end of February. We already do have support from Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, European Parliament, Parliamentary Assembly of NATO. So we are moving forward. Of course, it's not easy to talk about the time because, of course, the time is always a matter in such cases. But we have already the ideas how it can function, where it can function. I think it should be rather Kiev or The Hague if the Netherlands would give their consent to that. So. I mean, as of now, we already do have some, worked materials and results which we can share with our international partners and colleagues in order to find out their position and to move forward with the idea of establishing this tribunal.
You mentioned one key word, time. Can we talk a little bit about how long does it take to will justice in these cases? We see some cases in Ukraine where the national courts of Ukraine already even given verdicts to some of the crimes and certain individuals who committed crimes in Ukraine. But if we're talking about the international dimensions, ICC might take years to come to the conclusion. What is your timeline?
Well, wheels of justice, it's always a matter for international criminal justice. And of course, but I would say that this is also the matter for national courts also. In many national courts, we do have, not only in Ukraine, in many countries, we do have cases which last for years. So time matters. But what is important here, when we make consideration and or when we make some difference with the other processes in other courts and tribunals, the crime of aggression is not so hard to prove. The crime of aggression is easier to prove than war crimes or crimes against humanity, where you need to collect evidence, talk to witnesses, to victims, establish all the chains of command, and try to figure out whether the high-ranking officials are responsible for individual war crime committed, in particular, for instance, in Bucha or Irpin. The crime of aggression is much easier to prove because everything is on the ground, because everything is online, everything can be found from the open sources. So I do think that from the moment from which the tribunal will be established, we will not have too much time to bring the first indictments into life, because really crime of aggression is easier to prove than other international crimes.
You already mentioned that you're looking at different levels. Crime of aggressions, of course, that's the highest state level, but also you're looking at individual violations. But of course, especially in the crime of aggression, but also in case of the individuals, Russia has no intention to cooperate with the investigation. How do you think about it, or what can the international community do to make sure that the people who need to be held accountable actually do held accountable?
Well, of course, that's an issue, because we understand while the persons are in Russia physically, in the territory of the Russian Federation, there might be issues with actually them bringing it to justice. And this is also really important because we know that, for instance, the International Criminal Court, it doesn't work in absentia. So it needs to have a person in custody to go with the case. But I think that answering this question, it's important to say that there is this absolute victory of justice when these persons are in the court and the court hearings are being held. But I think that there are important elements, or I would say steps, which we should make in order to achieve this absolute victory. And these steps are, for instance, indictments or international arrest warrants of international courts and tribunals, because these international arrest warrants make these people delegitimized and make these people not viable in international arena with international community. So these people cannot travel, cannot use any benefit which the international community can give to them. So I think that even though while they are in Russia, this is an issue, but this issue that we should move and go further with indictments, with arrest warrants, I think that this is already a very important argument, and this is something what is really achievable, what is really can be done.
And I would encourage the audience to, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand. I already see one hand over there, so if we can get the mic to the gentleman in the first row.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, I want to ask you, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm someone who follows the situation in Russia and of course in Ukraine, and evidently lots of soldiers who were forced into the army and are there like hostages. And I want to ask you that in the process of investigation, to what extent you've had a feeling of repentance on the sides of Russians. Of course, some of them are very brainwashed, but perhaps being in the Ukrainian court, they are almost freed from their captivity of Russian army. Could you tell us a few cases, and that would be very important in the future, because the justice would mean that people who are caught doing crimes, they would repent, they would realize their criminality. Could you provide us with few examples of those Russians caught, tried, and investigated, whether they would come up and explain how they feel guilty, how they feel that they were forced, and how they regret their criminal activities, or whether you just encounter some kind of resistance, kind of a strong brainwash Russian soldiers?
Thank you for the question. Well, of course, Russian propaganda and Russian brainwashing really is an issue. And we do see that, unfortunately, a lot of people who reside in Russia are target of this propaganda and brainwashing. We already have some cases, as you know, in Ukrainian national courts in relation to Russian soldiers for committing of war crimes in the territory of Ukraine. And in the cases which have already been adjudicated in Kyiv and in some other regions, the suspects, when the process was going on, they admitted the guilt, they admitted that it was a crime and that they should not have perpetrated the crime, that they admit that they are guilty, and that they committed the crime because there was an order from the superior commander to do that. For instance, one Russian soldier told that I had an order from the superior officer to kill a Ukrainian civilian in the region of Sumy. So, of course, it doesn't say, so the person still is liable for that, of course, because you should not execute the illegal order. But with saying this, I think we may establish this idea and define this idea that these soldiers might understand that the whole aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine is criminal in nature, and that what they do are crimes, and that the only question is whether they are captured or not, or whether they may be captured the day tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I think that this is an important pattern, and this means that actually committing of war crimes, this is what we see in Ukraine, committing of war crimes is part of Russian war strategy. They cannot wage war on the basis of laws and customs of war. They just cannot do that. Their style of warfare is destroying everything, no matter whether the object or a person is a protected one or not, and gaining some result with this. So with saying this, of course, it will be very important for international courts and national courts also to establish this chain of command and to find out who are really responsible for all this policy of committing of thousands of war crimes, crimes against humanity in Ukraine. And of course, it is very important to bring to responsibility the highest political leaders and military leaders of Russia for waging this aggressive war. Because the crime of aggression is the crime which is under all the other crimes. If it wasn't a crime of aggression, all the other crimes wouldn't have been perpetrated.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. We have a question on this side, and while the microphone is going there, I want to follow up really quickly on the consequences of what you're talking about right now. You mentioned that Russia effectively makes war crimes part of its strategy, in a way legitimizing it and saying that there is nothing wrong, we do what we want, because that's how we see the world and that's how the world should function. My question is about whether you feel that there's a little bit of regionalization of international law and practice. Do you feel equal sympathy towards your efforts among the Western countries, or you're getting universal support towards what you're trying to achieve?
Well, first of all, I think that regionalization has also appeared in appeared in international law for ages, because this is an important factor, and we see that, for instance, some processes like integration, whatever, they are really very effective on a regional level. The same goes for human rights issues. I mean, of course, we have universal framework, but we do understand how it can be effective on regional level, in particular here in Europe. So I do not think that regionalization is a problem, but as of now, of course, we may see that the support to the idea of the bringing perpetrators to justice and of the establishment of the International Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine is really supported in Europe, and we are deeply grateful to our European colleagues and partners for that, though we are of course not limiting, neither ourselves, not our international partners. We of course want to achieve as much of support as we can from any country, from any region of the world. The whole thing is that we need to do that. We need to bring perpetrators to justice, and we need to find that appropriate, instruments how this can be done. And I'm sure that in relation to the crime of aggression, establishing of the International Tribunal for that is really an answer.
Thank you so much, and we'll take the question on that side.
Ambassador, for prosecuting war crimes as any crimes, it's very important to collect on a timely basis the evidence, handle them under international standards and so on. I know it will be a big challenge. And my question would be what kind of capacity you have nationally and what kind of assistance you need internationally for doing it on this very large scale, because of course you mentioned Bucha, Irpin and so on. Even more war crimes happen in Mariupol and so on, where the access is almost impossible. So I think we already have some countries providing this assistance, including Slovakia, sending prosecutors and so on, but I guess more should be done to do it in a very professional and timely manner. Thank you.
Well, of course, the issue of getting evidence and working with witnesses and victims is of course of a crucial importance. First of all, I would mention that we have the Russian aggression since February 2014. So this is very important also, that when we talk with our international partners and inside of Ukraine, we understand that 24th of February is not the new story. This is the continuation, the fully scale, of course, the fully fledged new stage of aggression, but this all started in February 2014. And with saying this, we already do have prosecutors and judges who already worked on the issues of war crimes committed, for instance, in Crimea or in Donbas since 2014. So we do have people on the ground who know this stuff, and this is very important. But of course, international efforts are of crucial importance. It is a really very effective mechanism to have this JIT, Joint Investigative Team, between Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC, Slovakia joined lately, Estonia, Latvia. So with having this international support, with sending prosecutors, with sending experts who work together with Ukrainian law enforcement officers, I think that this is a very important issue. We should also remember that the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court started the official investigation because of the address of the 43 member states of the Rome Statute of the ICC. So it is also important that is also the international support. So of course, this support is very important, and we may not say that it is enough at the level what we have now. Training, documenting, fixing, working together, this all is very important, because really we have thousands of criminal proceedings on these matters. Of course, the biggest part of them will go to the national courts in Ukraine, but we hope that some of them will go to the ICC also in relation to the persons who are not in Ukraine. So I do believe that each and every action which can be taken with the help of our international partners in relation to assist to Ukrainian law enforcement agencies and judges in bringing this justice in these cases, I think of course will be very much appreciated. And of course, talking about the crime of aggression, it will be very much appreciated that there is the decision and desire of international partners to engage in this issue, to participate in the establishment of the tribunal, and then effectively to work over the work and everyday work of the tribunal.
Thank you so much, and we have a question on this side. We'll take 2 questions in a row, so if you can get the microphone to the gentleman over there as well.
Thank you. Sergei Kapanadze from Georgia, one of the think tanks, KRAS. So it's one thing to prosecute those heinous criminals and the war crime perpetrators, and also to sanction the leadership of those who started this war, obviously, and that is extremely important. However, the other thing is that there are thousands of Russian soldiers who are fighting. Is Ukraine trying to, systematize the information about the soldiers who are in the field, and then working with the partners to maybe impose sanctions on them in terms of not getting visas, not going somewhere? Because that could be one of the ways to deter the participation in the warfare for the regular Russian soldiers. And those are thousands of people. And then there are some who go back, and then they might travel to Europe or, I don't know, acquire property. So that could be one of the things. And I'm just wondering whether you have any plans in this regard, or whether you're doing anything in this regard. And the other small comment on the tribunal, one of the, obviously that one is about the aggression, the already committed fact of use of force. However, one thing which is often overlooked, and was the case in the period of time running up to the war and aggression against Ukraine, is the threat of the use of force. Russia has persistently got away with the on-the-record threat of the use of force. And so if that tribunal ever comes, and I hope it does materialize, one thing it should focus on is to also deal with the threat of use of force. In every international legal document, use of force is together with the threat, but they always get away with the threat of force.
Thank you so much. Ambassador, we'll take another question over there.
Vlad Kobets, the International Strategic Action Network for Security. My question is about the role of Lukashenko in this aggression. It's a fact that Ukraine was attacked from the area of Belarus, de facto occupation by Russian troops. And my question is, what do you think, how you can comment the role of dictator Lukashenko in this Russian aggression against Ukraine? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So concerning the Russian soldiers participating in aggressive war against Ukraine, first of all, we can have national proceedings in Ukrainian courts, of course, for this fact. And this is something what has already been taking place since 2014, as you know. What we are focused now is on finding out whether they allegedly committed war crimes or any other grave violations during this war. And you know that, for instance, Ukraine has got information about the perpetrators of the crimes in Bucha, in Irpin, in Borodyanka. So we know what are these people, from where they are, and their names and their, I would say, profiles. So concerning the sanctioning issue and the issue of these limitations to them is, I think, another question, more a political one. Legally, we need to establish whether they allegedly committed these gravest crimes, because if they did, so they should be tried for that, and justice should, of course, prevail in all that cases. Concerning the use of force and threat of force, of course, this is an important issue, but I think what is important now in this case of Russian aggression against Ukraine is that when we make a test of whether aggression took place, it's 100% sure. I mean, all the actions from the list of the acts of aggression under relevant international legal documents are there. So, and we have the link. We understand who may be allegedly responsible for that. Of course, this is for tribunal to decide. But this is there. And I think that having all these things, it is important to have this tribunal with a jurisdiction which could last since the end of February 2014 till now, and which could bring these perpetrators to justice. And concerning the question about Belarus, it is obvious that acts of aggression against Ukraine happened from the territory of Belarus. And it is obvious that at least one of these acts took place, at least one which is enabling your territory in order to wage war against another independent state. But I think that concerning all the questions concerning the alleged list of perpetrators and who should be tried, I think that this is for tribunal itself to decide. We are here doing the job in promoting and advocating the tribunal, but tribunal is a legal mechanism. And I think that it is crucially important that tribunal is valid, tribunal is credible and legitimate. So I think that whenever it is established, the prosecutors of the tribunal and the judges of the tribunal would establish all the issues in relation to those who are responsible for acts of aggression against Ukraine.
Thank you so much. We still have 3.5 minutes, and I'll bring in one more person.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I just wanted to clarify, you're speaking about prosecutors, the help of prosecutors, but you didn't mention the help of investigators. It was just by omission, or you just did not? I mean, for an investigator. Why I'm asking about, I'm from Kharkiv, and myself and my team are documenting the destruction of civilian infrastructure within the criminal proceedings. And I know how much overworked and limited is the resource of investigators in Ukraine. So what can you comment on this?
Thank you for the question, and of course greetings to our Ukrainian hero city of Kharkiv. Whenever I talk about prosecutors, I mean law enforcement agencies in general, investigators, of course, police officers, prosecutors' offices, no matter how they call in each and every particular national state. But of course, this is all very important, starting with the evidence on the ground, and then on the basis of this evidence, making a case, making a trial, and then go with it to the court. So of course, investigators are included, and this assistance is very important.
Mr. Ambassador, we talked a lot about the persecution part, the investigation, but part of the wielding justice mechanism is making sure that the victims also get some compensation for the crimes that were committed against them or their families. Where do we stand there? Do you envision the possibility of financial reparations or any other mechanisms that would also provide some compensation for the victims?
When we talk about this new tribunal, which I'm sure will be established, this tribunal is only about the individual criminal responsibility. So it will have, as we anticipate, a narrow jurisdiction, only concerning crime of aggression against Ukraine, and only the issue of individual criminal responsibility. But Ukraine now is currently working on the also international mechanism of compensations and reparations. I think that sooner than later this idea will come into negotiations with our international colleagues and partners. So there will be this possibility to get these compensations for, of course, victims and for their family members, to get compensations for the mass atrocity crimes which were committed against them. So this track is also being now considered and worked on by Ukrainian and international lawyers.
And one very brief final question. Russian troops have been not only in Ukraine, but have been in many other countries. Are you trying to cooperate with other countries to track whether individuals who are committing crimes in Ukraine right now have committed crimes elsewhere, and whether it helps your accumulation of evidence against them?
Well, there are facts, of course, especially when we talk about Russian military, that the people were participating in the armed conflicts in other states, in the territories of other countries, and they are often maybe in the list of alleged perpetrators. But what is important about the crime of aggression, that the military and especially political leadership is there for many, many years, and that these people should be brought to responsibility for that atrocity acts.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. I'm afraid we have to finish right now, but that was a very enlightening conversation. Good luck to your efforts. We'll make sure that we do everything we can to help you in them. And we invite everybody now to enjoy the coffee break. And after the break, we're going to continue in this room with the next session, which is going to be titled A Suspect Comrade, Tackling the Kremlin's Global Influence, and it will start at 2:10. Thank you so much, everybody.